Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m., both here in the building and live online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, hello, far away people, you can join in the conversation. My name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here at the Pervasive Media Studio. I'm a white man in my 40s with long hair and a beard, wearing a grey t-shirt today advertising the University of Michigan, go Wolverines. I'm recovering from a cold, so if you hear my voice being a little croaky, that's what's going on. Sorry about that. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the space. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Nobody today. All right. Well, for those of you online who are new to the space, hello, welcome. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and make some time for collaboration. So a few notes before we begin. Please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can grab some tea or coffee or water. We have a quiet space just next to me, to my left, your right. So you can pop in there if you need to take a break at any point. Fire exits are at either end of the studio, at the other side of the studio. So again, my left, your right. We're not expecting a fire drill or anything. So if you hear a fire alarm, get over there. The studio team will direct you in that direction. And there are accessible toilets and baby change in the corridor over there next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. Those of you who are watching online, you can pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Lautem is here. He will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, please raise your hand and we'll send around a microphone so that Zach can hear you. And also the people on YouTube. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. Now, today's talk is supported by the Centre for Creative Technology at the University of Bristol. The centre is open to studio residents and University of Bristol researchers who are using creative technologies as a methodology broadly. This summer, the centre is organising a workshop series that is free to attend. Studio residents and UOB researchers will be running workshops spanning from VR to music and creative tech to speculative design. If you want to hear more about that, join the mailing list. You can talk to either Katie or Ed, who are here today. Please give us a wave, Katie and Ed. There they are. All right. Our speaker for today is Zach Blas. Zach is an artist, filmmaker, and writer whose practice spans moving image, computation, theory, performance, and science fiction. Today he's going to talk about his newest work, CULTUS, an immersive moving image installation that addresses the religious nature of AI in the Californian tech industry, considering the ways in which artificial intelligence is imbued with godlike powers and marshaled to serve beliefs around judgment and transcendence, extraction and immortality, pleasure and punishment, individual freedom, and cult devotion. So Zach, unfortunately, was not able to be here in person as originally planned, but he has braved the technical difficulties and is here over Zoom now. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Zach Blas.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. And thank you, Martin, for that introduction. And yeah, I'd like to thank the Pervasive Media Studio for hosting me, inviting me to share this time with you. And I'd also like to thank the folks doing queer AI research at the University of Bristol, who were the catalyst for this, particularly Francisco Benavenga and I'm completely butchering these names because they're so tiny on my little phone, and Katie Dedach. And I guess I just want to say, if I come off like a little disconnected from this talk, the setup that we had to arrange is kind of strange. My screen right now is just full screen on my presentation, and I can't see anything over there, so I can't see myself. So I might feel a little like disconnected during this talk, but I'm sure it'll be fine. And yeah, so what I wanted to do today is talk about the newest work I've made last year called CULTUS, which was presented at Art by Gallery in London during fall and winter, fall 2023 and winter 2024. But before I do that, I thought I would give a little preamble. And I guess what I would say is I'll kind of frame the CULTUS exists within an even broader research kind of project and trajectory. So I'll say a little about that, and then I'll talk through some of the research around AI religiosity that kind of conceptually and theoretically frames this project. And then I was told that this audience would be interested in hearing some of the technical aspects of the work. So I do have some of that to present at kind of towards the end, the second half of the presentation, to go through some of the processes that were used to make the work. So yeah, I'm just going to dive in. So what I wanted to say is to kind of frame CULTUS is that CULTUS exists within a broader trilogy of works, which are called Silicon Traces. And this trilogy, which has a prologue, and this is the prologue that you're looking at right now. And this body of work is about focusing in on fantasies, beliefs, fictions, but also the entangled histories within the Californian tech industry and how those cohere in Silicon Valley and affect how Silicon Valley has a sense of the future and how it wants to control the future. So I think that the takeaway is very much looking at belief, fantasy, and fiction and how that influences the way Silicon Valley envisions the future. So the first work, which was a prologue to the trilogy, I premiered in London in 2017, and this was a queer science fiction film installation called Contra Internet Jubilee 2033, which dealt with the kind of legacy of Ayn Rand, a writer and philosopher very influential to the Californian tech industry and American society more broadly. And it explored how her kind of enduring principles of selfishness and individuality have cohered within the Californian tech industry. And in this film, there's the science fictional scenario where Ayn Rand is visited by this AI assistant in the 1950s and time travels to a future Silicon Valley that's being overthrown by queer militants. And then in part one of the trilogy, which I made in 2019, was called The Doors. And this work was looking at kind of transformations in psychedelia and psychedelic culture in California. This focused on the emergence and popularity around microdosing LSD and magic mushrooms, as well as the nootropics industry, to think about, kind of this long history of California counterculture and tech entrepreneurialism entangled around the psychedelic, and how from around 2017 onwards, you had this kind of growing popularity of taking psychedelic drugs, of course, through microdosing in Silicon Valley as a way to enhance worker productivity. So just the work was very much looking at the kind of re-engineering of psychedelic drugs as worker productivity drugs. And the last thing I'll say before I dive into CULTUS is I've been working around this idea of the informatics of domination for a number of years, almost 10 years at this point. And this concept is kind of a feminist, queer, intersectional way of naming power. And I'm editing a book. I've been editing a book on this with two colleagues of mine, Melody Ju at UC Santa Barbara and Jennifer Rhee at Virginia Commonwealth University. And we have a book coming out called Informatics of Domination next year with Duke University Press. And this concept comes from the famous Cyborg Manifesto by the feminist science and technology studies scholar Donna Haraway, which I imagine probably a lot of you in the audience are familiar with, or if you've read this. And this idea of the informatics of domination, even though it's kind of there plainly in the Cyborg Manifesto, it's a concept that hasn't been really engaged with hardly at all. Fascinating, given how popular the manifesto is, and the concept of the cyborg has really been played out. But this idea of the informatics of domination emerges in a section in Haraway's manifesto where she has this really long diagram that this kind of two-column chart that's tracking different transformations in society and culture, and kind of marking a shift in patriarchal power at the close of the 20th century, and particularly kind of honing in on how science and technology is changing patriarchal power. And so we have things like representation moves to simulation, sex moves to genetics, but the last entry in this chart is white capitalist patriarchy, informatics of domination. And this formulation of white capitalist patriarchy is kind of like a shorthand of the Black feminist theorist Bell Hooks kind of longer formulation of imperialist, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And so what's kind of interesting about this diagrammatic formation of Haraway's kind of essentially updating of Bell Hooks' term is you have a kind of intersectional feminist genealogy kind of laid out here between these two terms, where Haraway's offering a kind of more focused term, we could say, to think about how one might engage in intersectional feminist critique around issues of science and technology. And Melody and Jenny and I have been really taken with this idea of the informatics of domination because it gives us a kind of intersectional feminist genealogy for ways of kind of thinking about critiquing issues around media and technology, particularly with addressing something like white capitalist patriarchy. And kind of the way that Haraway lays this out diagrammatically is so compelling because it shows that the terms are really kind of embedded within each other. So just wanted to kind of lay that out and introduce this idea of the informatics of domination because, Cultus is very much engaging with the informatics of domination. It's just looking at that from, kind of particular slice around AI religiosity within this. Okay, so let's go to Cultus. So this is an installation shot of the work, which I will kind of slowly unpack and unravel for you. And what I'll say is this work for me began with a question that I really it's a big question, but I think it's a very artistic question in a way, which is does God exist? And the reason I say this is such an artistic question is because it's one that artists have historically wrestled with for quite some time, and interestingly, historically, have often answered in the affirmative. That is, artists have provided visual evidence to confirm the existence of God through painting, sculpture, and other artistic forms throughout art history. So another point I'd like to make here with this is that, if you look through the Western art historical canon, for instance, you'll see that, right, artists have not only verified God's existence, but have done so in the service of rulers, royalty, and the wealthy. So, let's just look at one example. This is Michelangelo's ceiling fresco in the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican, Italy, the creation of Adam, painted from 1508 to 1512. And this is meant to illustrate the book of Genesis in the Bible, with God right on the right creating man, Adam on the left. I'm beginning with Michelangelo because strangely within this research, Michelangelo kept and continues to keep popping up. So, when I look at this image, I ask the question, if in Michelangelo's fresco, the Christian God creates man in his own image, then of course it seems reasonable to ask, or ponder, has not Michelangelo created God in his own image as well, in Michelangelo's own image? And, the research seems to be a resounding yes. And this is an excerpt, kind of a news article that was engaging with an academic study that claims the Last Judgment, which is another fresco in the Sistine Chapel, is based on scenes Michelangelo would have witnessed at 16th century Roman public baths, which also doubled as brothels. So Elena Lazzarini, who's a researcher at the University of Pisa, writes, the figures descending to hell and ascending to heaven are inspired by the virile, muscular, manual workers and porters Michelangelo would have seen during his visit to the baths, which are well documented. It was here in the brothels and baths Michelangelo defined the build of the working man as the ideal physique. So kind of some historical research here where you do see that, Michelangelo is indeed painting, depicting God, the spiritual, the heavenly in his own image. And, just to really drive the point home, one image in particular that I became really kind of obsessed with in the early stages of this project was this. So here you're looking at nothing less than the ass of God, and this is in the creation of the sun and stars and planets. It was created in 1512. This is on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And so we can look at this and, right, it seems that not only has Michelangelo created this God in his own image, but more specifically through his, gay desire, if we can call it, use the word gay there at this period of time. But I think this is a really compelling example of the entanglement of kind of desire, the depiction of God in one's own image. Now, there's a whole component of cultus that actually engages the ass of God. We can talk about it during the Q&A if you want, but I've decided to kind of focus more on the kind of core elements of the work. So, okay, let's jump forward. In 2017, another affirmative position on the existence of God emerged in Silicon Valley with the founding of the church, Way of the Future. And this church was created by Anthony Lewandowski, an engineer that also co-founded Google's self-driving car program. And the Way of the Future, basically, its core belief centers around the worship of a coming AI god or god of superintelligence. So this is the church has gone through some stages. For when it first emerged, it was basically a one-page website, and I haven't checked actually within the last like 4 or 5 months if the website is active. But for quite some time now, the website has been dead. But if you go back into the internet, use like the Wayback Machine Internet Archive, you can get access to the website from earlier years. And basically, it basically featured this, which is like the mission statement of the church. And I think you can look this up yourself if you were interested and compelled. But I won't read the whole thing to you, but there's just a couple points that I'd like to flag. I mean, they kind of go and we believe in progress, right? We're interested in intelligence, like beyond biology, not necessarily too kind of out of line. But then as we kind of move into their kind of talking about the creation of a super intelligence is inevitable. If you get down to these last 3 small paragraphs at the bottom, they write, "We believe everyone can help and should." And then next small paragraph, "We believe it may be important for machines to see who is friendly to their cause and who is not. And we believe this might not happen for a very long time, but yet still inevitable." So, I think with this point that we believe everyone can help and should, and that we believe it may be important for machines to see who is friendly to their cause and who is not. I think, just kind of honing in on these points, right? I think what's important to take away is this church is asking literally for everyone's help. To bring about this AI superintelligence god, suggesting that, it's basically required. And there's within that a kind of soft fear mongering, right? Notably with this sentiment that machines need to see who is friendly to their cause and who is not. So this church, right, it shut down for some time, and actually, I think it was in 2023, it has reopened. So as far as I know, the church exists, but again, I think the complicated thing with this church is the only way it's really kind of manifest is through this website and Anthony Lewandowski giving interviews. Like, it doesn't have a physical location, for instance. Okay, so one connection I wanted to make is that the kind of sentiments that are coming from the way of the future church harken back to Rocco's Basilisk, which maybe some of you have encountered. It was a thought experiment that gained much attention online in 2010 when Roku, a user of the Less Wrong community blog, argued that a sufficiently powerful AI agent or God would have an incentive to torture anyone who imagined the AI but didn't work to bring the AI into existence. The argument was called a basilisk, which is a deadly reptile, because simply hearing Roku's argument would supposedly put you at risk of torture from this hypothetical AI. So a basilisk is certainly a different image of an AI god from that conjured by way of the future church. And yet they, interestingly, I think, share some attitudes towards serving or helping AI gods prevail. Because the believer of the basilisk just does this out of fear. The believer of the way of the future church helps in the name of progress, but fear and progress are not mutually exclusive. So the way of the future provokes another question for me, kind of a second question within the kind of development of cultus, which was, right, not does God exist, but how does one help to manifest God? And at the time when I was working on cultus, since Way of the Future had closed, I just started asking a series of kind of speculative questions that were kind of generative for the project. And one of those was, did the church already bring an AI god or gods into existence and therefore had completed its mission and no longer needed to exist or be out there? So the Way of the Future, it might seem like a wacky fringe organization. I mean, of course it is, but at the same time, Silicon Valley and the California tech industry have always been influenced and at times pioneered modes of spirituality, occultism, mysticism, and religious belief. So this is the famed futurist and recent director of engineering at Google, Ray Kurzweil's book from 2010, in which he argued that the 21st century would be one of spiritual machines, and spiritual here is qualified as a marriage of human sensitivity with AI that exceeds human ability. So we also have kind of these like religious beliefs and attitudes that are circulating in Silicon Valley. You can see them manifesting in something like transhumanism, for instance, which is a movement that advocates for the enhancement of the human condition by developing technologies to enhance longevity and cognition. Notably, a goal of certain transhumanists is immortality through a fusion of flesh and machine, or the downloading of consciousness onto computers. So this is how a religion like Terrorism emerges. So Terrorism is a religion, a transhumanist religion. It comes from the Greek word for earth seed, which is also the name for the futuristic religion that's found in novelist Octavia Butler's sci-fi fiction, The Parable of the Sower. Terrorism is headquartered in Florida in the US, and it's organized around 4 core tenets, which are life is purposeful, death is optional, God is technological, and love is essential. So moving onward, I'm just kind of giving you a lay of the land of all of this right now, kind of like a literature review of kind of AI tech religiosity in Silicon Valley. So I think it's also worth noting that corporate logos, brands, products, and company names often signal the presence of spiritual or religious dimensions in this culture. I've had a really long-term interest in this and have made a lot of work around this, kind of the fusion of branding and religious symbology. So here's one example. This is the nootropic company Neurohacker Collective, which is based outside of La Jolla, California, and they produce a smart drug named Eternus. Actually, they've recently changed the name to this. I can't remember what it is, but it doesn't sound as kind of dramatic as Eternus. And Eternus is geared towards radical life extension. This kind of non-ironic interest in radically extending life and living forever. And if you look closely, you'll see the company's logo is an altered Metatron's cube, which is the image on the right. And so in sacred geometry, the archangel Metatron, the angel of life, oversees flows of energy in a mystical cube known as the Metatron's cube, which contains all the geometric shapes in God's creation and represents the patterns that make up everything God has created. So the implication here is that you too can gain access to all the flows of God's energy with this daily supplement. Okay, and then I think maybe this is one of the last ones. This is the Way of the Future's logo, which is an upside down Celtic Trinity knot, which dates back to 500 BC. It's a symbol associated with everlasting life. Also has a Christian context. So, you might be wondering, like, is there a kind of united Silicon Valley religion then? I think there's a lot of different ways to think about this. But there have been different moments in time where different kind of unified ideologies have been pointed out within this California tech industry context. One is a famous essay from the 90s called The Californian Ideology, in which Silicon Valley is framed as a mixture of techno-utopianism with neoliberal economic and political values. Back to Michelangelo. So in 2015, the kind of pop intellectual Yuval Noah Harari further theorized the Californian ideology in his book Homo Deus. And he kind of really pulled out some of the kind of religious tenets of thinking about the California tech industry. I'm not so interested in Harari. That's not why I'm actually showing this image, but what I was interested in is his use of the same Michelangelo fresco we saw earlier. So here you see kind of like a close-up of the creation of Adam on his book cover, and instead we see what he terms a homo deus, a kind of human god, sparking flows of creation between humans and machines. And there's actually one of the only scholars I'm aware of that's actively researching AI religious organizations, Beth Singler, who is based at the University of Zurich, has called these this kind of proliferation of kind of reworkings of Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam. Here's just two instances, but there are dozens and dozens of these out there. She has called this the AI creation meme, the AI creation meme. So just I'm quite interested in, going back to Michelangelo, thinking about the kind of history, the politics, the desire, all that's kind of tangled up within his work and what it means and why this becomes the go-to for visualizing or conceptualizing a religious dimension to, to AI. And okay, I think I'm just going to jump ahead in the interest of time. And, what I wanted to say is the way that there's a couple ways I've just tried to approach a lot of this material. And one is through this idea of the political unconscious, which is a really early work by the Marxist theorist and scholar Friedrich Jameson. And the kind of point with the political unconscious when Jameson was writing on literature was that all literature is political at the end, and it's not necessarily just purely formal. I think probably a point a lot of us can agree upon. But I started kind of thinking about this and began kind of reworking it and thinking about a religious unconscious, like a religious unconscious within the California tech industry. And that, many of us are kind of tangled up within and complicit as we're using and working on devices that are imbued with the belief systems of this particular place. And so I wanted to make a work that, kind of really went into and surfaced this religious unconscious, but also I wanted to make a work that really took up this long tradition of art that I signaled to at the start, right? Artists depicting gods or kind of depicting religious figures. And I decided, I wanted to use artificial intelligence, since this work is about AI, as a way to, give evidence to the existence of gods of artificial intelligence. But, I guess my caveat is I didn't, this wasn't for the rulers, the wealthy, the 1%, as in with the case of Michelangelo. But of course, I can't fully control who benefits. And, Silicon Valley does have its way of kind of subsuming its critics. So, okay, to Cultus. So, this is the installation at Arbite, and Cultus is I think of it as a techno-religious computational device. I really think of the installation as like a room size computer. It's a kind of a god generator that it invokes a pantheon of AI gods whose prophets share kind of teachings and rituals and symbologies. And there's four gods that you encounter in this installation. There is Expositio, which was this AI god of exposure and desire. There's Eudicium, which is this AI god of judgment. There's Lacrimae, an AI god of tears. And then there is Eternus, AI god of immortality. And cultus is the Latin word for worship, which articulates this act, that's solicited when you encounter the installation. And basically, the way this works is invocation songs are performed, and there are bodily offerings on each kind of corner of this installation. So, through an offering and invocation song, um, AI deities emerge. And I think also what was interesting for me here is that visitors might find themselves caught in acts of devotion to AI gods they didn't know that they already served. But there's also a kind of heretical, sacrilegious presence that manifests and persists within this system. So I think what's important with cultus is, like, on the one hand, it's kind of surfacing an element of the informatics of domination, but at the same time, the installation through this tension between AI gods and a heretical presence also kind of basically presents some kind of struggle, some kind of tension between these two forces that is not resolved, that is ongoing. And another historical point is that the work, kind of takes a cue or kind of reference from the Elizabethan mathematician, mystic, and also royal spy, John Dee, and his holy table, which was used to communicate with angels to learn the so-called Enochian language, which was an angelic language that enabled communication with God. So I'm interested. I've made a lot of work on John Dee in the past, and I can say more about him later if you're interested. But I'm find like this kind of John Dee is a figure that mixes the mathematical, the mystic, the imperial surveillance as a kind of proto figure for certain Silicon Valley figures. And I see some interesting historical continuity with the creation of the Holy Table and certain tech companies today, like for instance, Palantir Technologies, and the way that the crystal ball is evoked as a way to commune. So cultus kind of works from this just as a kind of historical point for how it formalizes itself. And basically, you can see there's this kind of core conjuring sigil on the floor, illuminated in red, which kind of functions like the computer's on-off button. There's a levitating altar, and then there's also this scrying surface for visualizing the prophets that come forward. So it's kind of meant to call back to that crystal ball, but of course, it's an LED sphere. And as I mentioned, there are different kinds of offerings, bodily fluids in the installation, and this one is for the god Eternus, and it is blood. So, okay, I've kind of just, I think I've said what I want to say about the installation, and I'm going to play a documentation video that's about 8 minutes, and then I'll talk about some of the technical stuff after. So I'm just going to let this play, and yes, it's about 8 minutes long. Just, I should say the work is quite long. It's about an hour-long loop, so just giving you this kind of 8-minute clip to give you a sense and kind of let you experience some of the music and some of the prophets that emerge.
Who exist only as holes and orifices drip and spread.
extremely natural for me to lick up your cum because you subscribe to this chain of obedience. We are stunned by your devotion, so spread and come again and again. Expositio will lick it off every possible place.
Eurekaeum, engineer of the black bounding box, to please lead us clean, judge us so plainly in the dark some deep, whose secrets the sun's light does not penetrate.
Out of the cauldron of annihilation, from inside the black bounding box of judgment, I come to answer your call and share a prophetic formula. Everybody shall be judged. You do not have the right to have done with the biometric razor of judgment.
To get me emotional, baby. And if I run out of teardrops, let it hurt. I won't stop, 'cause I'm gonna cry 576 tears.
Surprise, anger, sadness, and disgust. And when your weeping falls silent, hear your God lacrimized cry. Devouring your tears was like taking the very best thing. Profundior.
Blood transfusion in the water reach cold. Biotic therapy with sensorial ashwagandha returns our mortal prince energizes.
Hi, I'm Steve, and I'm the Chief Communications Officer for Returnus, first god of extropian immortality, headquartered in Encinitas, California. The science is here now. Up to 15 years ago, you would have called reversing death science fiction, but today, I call it reality. Radical life extension is your transport to the future, and the tools are already here. Now, before you go out there and start our Returnus Tier 1 nootropic program, once again, imagine that you are eternal. All you have to do is believe. Say you believe.
Something went wrong. Was it sweet ambiguity? Or trained bombing that appears inconsequential and apocalypse? Where did it not happen and spread? Who controls the mirrors, controls the world is a belief. But every day the glass can break. We are that heretical whole with a zero computer that doesn't program visibility against the world.
Give us exhibitionism without capture.
Okay, so that is Cultus. Hopefully that gives you a good sense of the work and what it would be like to experience it. So yeah, I thought I would talk through some of the technical stuff. And I mean, I don't know how this is if a lot of this is that exciting to look at, but I've just taken some screen grabs of the different kind of training sets and things that I worked on with my production team. And one of the main ways that we worked with artificial intelligence on this work is through text generation. So I would say for probably a 6-month period, just data sets. You can see these training sets were getting created, and training sets 1 and 2 are kind of the almost control data sets for conjuring songs and sermons, and then basically each god had 2 different training sets, all text-based for conjuring songs and sermons. So what this would look like, let's say for this is a kind of the main training set on sermons. We just gathered a massive array of kind of pan-religious material to work with, and how that, like, this is like religious text, but also different kinds of material in Silicon Valley. And then kind of same thing with conjuring songs, gathering different types of kind of religious songs and hymns, and different ways of kind of singing worship across a variety of kind of religious and spiritual modes of practice. And then those are brought into kind of like cross-pollinated, if you will, with the different sets that were created for the gods. So this is a training set for Eternus, and I believe this is its conjuring song. So you can see there's different kind of categories, and within the text data sets for the gods, I mean, a wide range of material: philosophy, scientific studies, fiction, corporate writing, advertising, all that kind of stuff is brought together, and gives you a sense of kind of moving into some of the topics within Eternus. So this was a massive kind of early stage of the project that took a really long time to put together. You can see this is within Expositio. That's kind of a god that's dealing more with like sexuality and desire. So there was, kind of BDSM literature, material on kind of critical surveillance studies, historical writings around different types of punishment, stuff about airport security. And then I worked with 2 machine learning engineers, and we had these custom training sets, and then we worked with different large language models. At the time when we were doing this, I think the team was, I mean, I was definitely most satisfied with working with GPT-3. And, you know, it's interesting at this, I mean, the stuff is always changing so much, but the reason we, right, kind of built these custom data sets and trained with GPT-3 is because our results wouldn't be censored, because we wanted to have, you know, kind of sexually explicit and different kinds of graphic materials. And, you know, for instance, we did experiments with Chat GPT, and of course you get like just a very, very different output from that is kind of not, I think, tapping into some of the, you know, kind of graphic and explicit qualities that I wanted to be able to capture in the work. And what would happen is, you know, this training process, we would just, you know, output like hundreds and hundreds of pages. And then there would just be like a very kind of slow process that would take months of editing. I mean, I'm not like some John Cagean purist with this, where, you know, we get the material and then I'm interested in kind of having, you know, taking an editorial creative approach with it and pulling material out and crafting that, but just, you know, really long process. And kind of, you know, really fascinating things came along the way. I think like a lot of us found this long form blowjob poem out of the Expositio training set. This was just, you know, generated in the output. This is not edited. You know, we were very amused by this kind of material, and some of this does feature into Expositio's sermon, I believe, or song. But then you can see that the process in the end, we begin with hundreds of pages of output, and then this is the invocation, the conjuring song for Eternus, and the final result is like incredibly, you know, kind of narrowed down and short and tight. Same thing with the sermons; they would be, you know, less than like 1 page long. So just a long kind of process of editing and working through the text generation. With symbols, there's, I think, 76 symbols in the artwork. You know, each kind of god has a whole array of symbols. And with this, we did 2 different approaches where we gathered existing references from, you know, different kinds of companies or organizations, you know, whatever it might be. And then we also did training in Midjourney and got different kinds of outputs. This is actually a corporate logo for a radical life extension company. And then Midjourney exports for Eternus would look like this. So we would feed different company logos, branding logos into Midjourney, kind of gather just like a wide range of output. You know, we'd have about like maybe 60 references or 100 for each god. And then that becomes kind of standardized through a graphic design language to try and develop a kind of consistency. So the kind of final output of Eternus symbology, like working from the training sets and the branding logos, we come up with a set of symbols like this. And this is Eternus's final set. And with the prophets, you know, how those prophets were created, one of the first steps, I worked with Stable Diffusion and did different experiments around kind of faces of gods or religious entities, and came up with some different looks for each of the prophets. So this was one of the looks for Eternus. This was one of the looks for Eudicium. Then after we've agreed on, and I keep saying the word we because as you will see at the end of this, and as you can imagine, a work like this, there were, you know, dozens of people that worked on this project. You know, I'm originally trained as a filmmaker. I work more like a film director on my projects. So there was, you know, kind of, we had the machine learning team, a kind of computer graphics team, and a motion capture team that, you know, worked on the performances. And I really like working with actors. So all those prophets that you were looking at, they were actually performed by people. And we did motion capture performances using Unreal software to capture these performances. So this is an early take with Susanna Sasha, who played Eugenie Expositio's prophet. I'll let you just see what that looks like, give you a little clip.
Recording.
I am Eugenie, sap of exposition, who is your god of digital exhibitionism.
And this is Ricardo Dominguez, and Susanna is based in Berlin. Ricardo Dominguez is based in San Diego, California. Also, Susanna is more of an actor, performance artist. Ricardo is Also performance artist, visual artist. Oh, sorry, oh, maybe this is only an image for Ricardo. Wait, no, here we go, you can see a clip.
Out of the cauldron of annihilation, from inside the black bounding box of judgment, I come to answer your...
Okay, so then we kind of bring the motion capture into Unreal, and this is, I just thought this would be interesting. This is the capture of Ricardo.
A prophetic formula. Everybody shall be judged.
And then, we work with this in Unreal, create the looks for the prophets.
Out of the cauldron of annihilation, from inside the black bounding box of judgment.
And then, of course, we end up getting like the final result after many months of like working through this and kind of refining the aesthetics. And I thought it might be interesting for you to see some of the kind of physical, how this physically materialized at Arbite. They have this really interesting floor that's actually removable, which allowed us to kind of build into the floor and, use that for all the cabling. So this was like laying out the installation. And this was the LED sphere that we worked with to present the material. And these are kind of tests that's the screens at the bottom for the symbols of the altar. And yeah, and then of course, after like, I think a month and a half of install at Arbite, it all kind of came together like this. Of course, I skipped some steps, but I thought, maybe I would just highlight the kind of AI generation that was used in the work and how the performances were captured to, give you a sense that there's actually were performances by people. And yeah, here are the CULTUS credits if you want to take a look and get a sense of the kind of cast and the team and the music. I didn't really talk about music and sound, but a big part of this work. And, as I said, another component of this deals with the Ass of God, which was when this exhibition traveled after Arbite, it went to Secession in Vienna, and it just closed there a week ago. And in Vienna, we developed this book around AI heresy, particularly through the Ass of God. So the kind of Vienna show let this other side of the project kind of develop more. And this is kind of like a religious studies book that exists within the world of the artwork. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I think I went a little longer, but I'll end it at that. And yeah, thank you.
Frozen, don't you? Thank you very much. Zach, do you have any questions? We'll stick the hand up. Well,
I actually, before you ask a question, I just wanted to say that the audio was very garbled on my end, so it would be great if you could speak slowly. And unfortunately, I still might not be understand it, but I guess worst case scenario, it can be in the chat.
Okay, great. Everyone got that? Speak slowly and clearly. Katie has a question.
Hello, Zach. Thank you so much for this talk. It was really interesting to see the full process. Yeah, I just had a question. So you mentioned in the work, is it garbled or is it okay?
I'm able to follow. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned that in the work there was this kind of role of, I guess, like the heretic. I was thinking about your work and the Arts of God, and I guess thinking what was the role of the heretic in the work, and then kind of in your outside research. I guess like the role, like I was thinking about like within the space of Silicon Valley, who is doing like the disruption, or who is doing the kind of rupturing of the speculative mechanisms that Silicon Valley use. Is it like, I guess I'm thinking of like people who are who are kind of like working in Silicon Valley, who are doing the kind of like tech against genocide? Are they part of this digital heresy, or is it more kind of the people who are embedded in like the higher structures who are doing the speculative imaginings that become a heretic in some way by trying to like, I don't know, do a kind of like succession moment of taking over control? So yeah, just does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks so much. And it gives me an opportunity to say a little bit more about Heretic. Sorry, there's some feedback. Let me try and ignore it. Yeah, I mean, so what I would say, Katie, is that I think with these works, like especially the Silicon Traces project, because the prologue, I think, focused more on resistance and revolution, but the first two works, The Doors and Cultus, have been so much more about structures of power. And and I think it's interesting because often I will find people will have critical responses to that with my work because all artists end up having work that they're really well known for. And I think my like Britney Spears pop song artwork is Facial Weaponization Suite. It's the work I'm always asked to show and talk about. And of course, that work is very much about resistance and refusal. But it's not to say I don't care about those things. Of course I do, but I just think of like the work is just cumulative, and one work can't do everything. And I like to make works that have different kind of focal points. And I think for Cultus, the focal point, is very much like how to look at the informatics of domination within this context of AI religiosity. And really, for me, I'm like interested in a lot of these works. I'm really interested in complicity, and not necessarily from like a moralistic point of view, but I think like the kind of the sensual enveloping qualities of the work are a way that I think about making someone kind of experience and be reflective upon complicity when they're encountering a work like this. But at the same time, like if you're making a work like this, I think it's really important that the power structure doesn't feel totalized, because then I think it becomes like the fantasy or the kind of imaginary around the power structure, maybe is being exaggerated in an unproductive way. So on the one hand, I guess I'll just say that even though the Heretic, it's a small, it's like maybe a 5-6 minute segment in a work that's an hour long, but I feel like it holds the space for a really important break or fracture within the work. And then, I mean, of course you have to stay and experience the work, but I just think it holds the place of a, kind of political struggle. And I guess the whole reason I got interested in heresy was because I wanted to stay within that place of religiosity and maybe not move to a site where there could be another way of working at this from a more, kind of like a non-religious way where the site of resistance is outside of that. But I think, again, because I've just been so taken and fascinated with the fantasies and beliefs and fictions, I wanted to stay within that place and, actually let something kind of manifest in the work that stays within that site of religiosity. So yeah, just on the one, I mean, I feel like the Heretic is holding that site of that place of kind of resistant forces around this. And of course, and anyway, and part of that is right about like making this not a totalized system, because it's not a totalized system. There are kind of resistant critical forces. Like it's always in a kind of tension with that. And then I think, for me with this work in particular, the Heretic manifests as breaking glass. It's like, it's very abstract. The Heretic is nameless, the Heretic is faceless. The way that this was approached, maybe this is interesting with production, is that every single person that performed in this work, so there were 4 performers for each of the prophets. I performed the prophet for Steve, the prophet of Eternus. And then there were, 4 singers for each of the invocation songs. So there were 8 of us. And the 8 of us actually performed the Heretic. So I thought that was important because the Heretic becomes a collective entity within the work. And also just from a kind of, more maybe meta point of view, thinking about production, the cast, was pretty much all queer. And I didn't want like inviting this queer cast to come in and just only play these like AI god worshippers and prophets. So by doing it this way, it let us kind of straddle either side, which again to me is a way of kind of thinking about complicity and resistance and how those actually are often like held together and negotiated. But then, like what is the heretic? Like, I mean, it's such a great question because in that Ass of God book, I did an interview with Beth Singler, and we talked about there's just heresy all depends on like what you're kind of like, I guess, defining as the religious norm. And I think there could be a lot of different ways of framing this. And I actually asked her about the question of disruption, because I think there's one way that you could think about this, where you could identify disruption itself, as a kind of heresy. But then if you think about maybe the Californian ideology and how that's obviously kind of morphed and shifted. There's an interesting book that just came out this year called Silicon Valley Imperialism, kind of thinking about that as the kind of religious, the kind of norm of the religiosity within it, then maybe like the heretical presence are those people taking positions that are kind of contra this Californian ideology, which of course like are very, very far and I think wide reaching. And yeah, within this work, like I didn't, there was a kind of intentionality around keeping that abstract, because it's like holding space for those positions today and those positions to come. And I didn't want there to be a certain element of like kind of specificity there. The way that I wanted that to kind of materially manifest in the idea of conjuring. And for me, the like I really have this thing with breaking glass, I guess, and it really started years ago when I was doing research around Californian architecture and how all these new Silicon Valley headquarters are often all glass, whether it's Google or Apple or Facebook, and kind of thinking about, those right kind of modernist architectural principles, coming into these Silicon Valley architectures, the ideologies around kind of transparent glass, the surfaces of our devices. And so, yeah, for me, like the kind of playing with this idea of breaking glass as a way to kind of, tap into these different ways that glass material resonates with like the literal kind of infrastructures of Silicon Valley headquarters, but also devices, and it harkens back, of course, to the crystal ball. Sorry, I know that was really long, but thanks. It was a great question.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Zach. I think we have time for one very quick question, if anyone else has one. AJ, sorry. Sorry, you got there first.
Hey, thanks for all the insights. I really enjoyed getting to know a bit of the process and also seeing the document. I would like to experience it in person as well. I was very curious about like the setting of the space, because it was so, I felt in space it would be quite transportative. And also specifically, have you mentioned you were inspired by sermons and how John Dee's work as well. So I was, as well as I know about like rituals and invocations, it's, I believe, a way to induce, say, altered states of consciousness and so on, to channel or talk to these angels or entities. So I was wondering if you incorporated those elements, or was it more inspired for the actual bit of each of those gods and sermons for them?
Okay, I think I got it, and if I don't answer you correctly, just let me know. But yeah, I think just it was about kind of setting up the space and being inspired by John Dee's Holy Table. And I mean, yes, like, there's I have another work called Metric Mysticism, if you really want to get into this, the ways that you can think of John Dee and his connections to someone like Peter Thiel today. But yeah, I was really interested in the Holy Table, and right, John Dee would scry. There's a crystal ball. Well, he would work with Edward Kelly, his scryer. They would conjure angels. And what was really interesting to me there is that you're not getting direct access to God, right? It's mediated through angels. And then the angels come and teach and kind of share the word, the language of God. So I was really, really interested in that whole kind of setup and thinking about how so much of this with John Dee kind of works within the framework of thinking about contemporary questions around religiosity and mysticism in Silicon Valley, whether it's the crystal ball and how that resonates with Palantir Technologies, Peter Thiel's company, named after the crystal ball in Lord of the Rings, the sigils in, like John Dee's table. It's just bursting with sigillology and thinking about how I just kind of showed you a little strand of that with the way that you can think about that through Silicon Valley branding. So just kind of so much there. It's such a rich kind of historical point to work from. And within the installation, of course, it's an automated experience, right? It's not interactive in the sense, of course, we kind of thought about this where like, what if someone stands at a corner and then kind of activates something? But the installation is, it's on a loop, and you have an invocation song being sung, and then kind of the logic of the automation is that, right, once that song is complete, this prophet has emerged. And kind of just like within John Dee's holy table, you don't get access to the gods. These prophets appear and deliver some kind of lecture, and then it kind of like moves on. And, maybe the only other thing I could say is the way, the installation was laid out, there's this black square embedded within the floor, which is kind of like the boundary of the installation. And it's just like, it's an interesting move because it's seamless at Arbite, like because of the way that their floor works. But still, like, it creates this tension in the viewer. I mean, that I just, I kind of enjoy these little details about whether you choose to stand outside of the kind of conjuring, computational apparatus, or step within inside. And, because of course, within this logic of conjuring, there is the idea that you are to be inside the square, if you will, to bring forward the spirits, gods, entities, all of that. But yeah, hopefully that responded to some of the elements in your question. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Zach. I think that's probably all we've got time for. So can everyone join me in saying thank you to Zach? All right, before you all go, if you do want to stick around today and Hot Desk and find out more about what we do, then please find one of the studio team. Give us a wave, studio team. We are. If you want to find out more about the Center for Creative Technology, we got Katie and Ed. And now I'm on the screen, that's freaky. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you all again next time.